So it's election night, huh? Woo!
Oh, boy.
And you voted, I see. I voted. Have you voted?
I didn't vote.
Oh.
Yet. I got a shot.
Good answer.
You did.
Got a shot, yeah.
I did it early because I know the KU game's on at 6 tonight, so. Okay, you guys ready? Yeah. All right. The day after the World Series ended last week, the Royals named Mike Matheny as their new manager. Matheny was the favorite, so the choice didn't surprise. But was it the right hire? Star columnists Sam Mellinger and Vahe Gregorian discuss the move on SportsBeat KC, presented by Big O Tires. It's Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day. Hope you voted. And I'm your host, Blair Kirchhoff. Also, today is the opening of college basketball season, and did the Champions Classic land a good one? It's always fun when Kansas, Duke, Kentucky, and Michigan State get together for their annual preseason doubleheader, or early season doubleheader, I should say. But this year, those are the nation's top 4 ranked teams, with the Spartans first, followed by the Wildcats, Jayhawks, and Blue Devils. KU and Duke meet at 6 p.m. today, followed by Michigan State, Kentucky. Star KU beat writer Jesse Newell and I will talk about the outcome of the Kansas game on tomorrow's podcast. But first, there's a Royals hire to break down, and let's hear from Mike Matheny at his introductory news conference last week.
Okay. Dayton, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be sitting up here today. Also going to throw out a few more thank yous to Mr. Glass and Dan Glass for originally opening up the door that I could be a part of this, and doors to the organization, and obviously to Mr. Sherman and the new ownership group for entrusting me with the privilege of being in this seat right now, and that is exactly how I view this, as a privilege and as a trust. So, it was a year ago, actually. Emily Pending in the front office reminded me today that a year ago today was the first day that I walked into the front office here at Kauffman Stadium, and the first time able to kind of interact. And I remember that day extremely well, for one reason more than any other, is when I left, I went home to Kristen and our 5 incredible kids, and I said, I don't know why, I can't explain it, but I truly believe this is where I'm meant to be. I believe that's where we are meant to be. And I couldn't explain it as they asked me more about it, except there were a few things that really stood out to me and felt that I needed to research a little further. Unfortunately, in the advisory role, I was able to see behind the scenes what was going on, and it became obvious that the character and the culture that was here is different and unique. And that stood out to me, a culture of people, a culture of care, because I truly believe that how you treat people matters. And to me, I could see that happening in every corner, regardless of position, regardless of status. There was a level of people caring about people caring about this community, people caring about this brand, what it stands for, and what it means to this community. And I just wanted to dive in and see more. And so after that, as a foundation with the culture, you just build on what I was able to watch this year. And I turned into a fan. I was able to be a fan of the Kansas City Royals all year, listening and watching every game. Just am so impressed with the talent that we have here, that core group, the talent that's on the way, the guys that we know are going to continue to make this happen. And with that being said, I said it to some of the front office personnel. The one word that kept standing out to me was sustained. And it wasn't just let's get back and have success. It was how do we create sustained success? So you've got an incredible culture. You've got a drive and a commitment. You've got incredible players that are on the way with a very, very bright future. And all these things coupled with a city that I love to come to, always have, coupled with a fan base that is as passionate as any and loves this team. All of those things together created an opportunity for me to have a really clear answer not too long ago when Mr. John Sherman asked me, why do you want to be here? And I had a why, and the why was this, is I truly see something very, very special about to happen here. And I want to be a part of it.
So Mike Matheny thinks something truly special is going to happen, and he wants to be a part of it. Good. I hope something truly special is going to happen as well. When's that going to happen? Vahe Gregorian and Sam Mellinger are here to discuss the Matheny press conference and some of what he talked about, which, by the way, was in 2 parts. which I found very interesting and contrasting, right? The press conference may have been boilerplate stuff, as press conferences tend to be, but then he had a little side session with Vahe, Sam, and some others that was a little more revealing. Tell us about that.
Well, one quick thought on that is it was very alert of the Royals to make sure to do that. Very astute. I wasn't here when they brought in Ned or any of the other manager changes. This is my first since they've been here. I don't know whether they did something like this in the past, but it struck me that there was more of a need for it than perhaps there had been before because of what I don't want to say what passes for controversy with Mike Matheny, but for what seemed to be an underlying tension from some fans about his ability to relate to players and people. And I think they were wise to do it because Mike Matheny was up to the task as well. I thought he was really good in that second session. I know the broader session didn't enamor himself to Sam. It didn't bother me like it did Sam, but I know why Sam thought that second session was more necessary.
Yeah, the part and look, those initial formal news conferences are also formal, right?
Right.
But I was most interested in, because to me the negative blowback has been how it ended in St. Louis. And to me, that's how it ended in St. Louis isn't nearly as important as the next 15 months and how he changes. And to me, that's what I went in there wanting to see. And look, he's not done the job yet, so this is we're still projecting. But I just wanted to see how much of the end in St. Louis he was willing to own and willing to raise his hand and say, my bad. And when that question came up, and I guess it was me that asked it, but he basically said, well, we had a lot of success in St. Louis, and 6.5 years is a long time to be the manager, and we had good success with relationships and winning games and all that stuff. That's all true. 6.5 years is a long time for a manager in big league baseball, and they did win a lot of games. Made four postseasons, postseason in each of his first 4 years. But that's not the point. The point is he got fired. And so to me, that was really disappointing that was deflecting, nothing went wrong. Sometimes change just happens. And it was so different than how he was with I can't remember how many of us there were.
Maybe 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, something like that. He went on, I asked kind of a similar question of what I did in the formal press conference, and he talked, I timed it, I didn't time it, but on the digital voice recorder, it was like 7 minutes he talked, and he owned everything. It was so different than the first time, and I don't know if if it's a chance to think about how you answered the first time, or if it was just a more relaxed setting or what. But to me, it was two ends of an extreme, and I was so impressed with him in that. It wasn't one-on-one, but in that just smaller group setting. I thought he was terrific there.
You said this in as many words, but I think his best answer of the day was the one to your question, the 7-minuter.
Yeah.
And his worst was the one from your question in the press conference, because it was borderline defensive the way he said it in the press conference. And he had owned up to some stuff in kind of half stride ways before that, but that kind of took it back a little bit, and it'd be interesting to know how you and me too, what we would have written if we hadn't had that second sequence. I think it would have been different on both parts. I think maybe you a little more specific to that.
Yeah, so it's a weird thing. You hire a guy that has a .555, I think that's right, win percentage, and made 4 straight postseasons. And the reaction almost immediately from the moment he was mentioned as a candidate, at least from what I've seen, has been basically 100% negative. You don't get 100% of anything, but I'm struggling to
It was as if he had committed a crime of some sort. That's how I remember feeling. What has he done exactly that way?
And I think, and I want to be clear that this is not Mike Matheny or someone close to Mike Matheny saying this, but just from talking to people in and around St. Louis and that were there during that time, I think some of the Bud Norris stuff in particular has been overblown or mischaracterized. I think some of the other stuff about Dexter Fowler and him not talking to each other, I mean, there's there's receipts, as people would say. There was a story in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch where Derek Gould, who I think is one of, if not the best baseball beat writer in the country, just asked him, and no, look at my phone. Here's a text thread with me and the manager. But he obviously had some mistakes. He obviously, there's young players that didn't feel like they had a chance, or more specifically, didn't know how they could trust him of how they can be in the lineup the next day. There's some rough edges like that. I also think that I believe that Mike Matheny is smart. I believe that he's focused. I believe that he's committed. I believe that he's a good baseball man. And I think when you have all those ingredients and your weaknesses, your blind spots, as that was Matheny's term, get exposed in that way, if you have any self-awareness at all, if you really do care about your craft as much as Mike Matheny seems to, you're going to effort to correct those things. And I think he has in some really tangible, obvious ways.
This is going to be the thing that, of course, we can only measure going forward, and maybe even that won't really measure how he embraced that stuff in the last 15 months. But to me, it's pretty clear that this was just sort of an incubator of all that this last year or so. That he really wasn't kind of in a full immersion of self-improvement. I mean, I really believe that, and whether it was being involved in virtually every facet in some way of the Royals machine, right? Whether it's being with prospects or being in the training room even a little bit, or working with analytics people, all these things. That was one plank of it. And then I guess he took some things on himself that were sort of under the Royals umbrella, but maybe at his own volition. Things like getting media coaching. He's alluded a few times, and as did Dayton, to leadership courses. It's a little unclear to me exactly what that was, but all that stuff to me I see it as telling, and I believe it. I believe that meant he was a person who understood he had blind spots and needed to get better. And you've said this before, Sam, with different audiences, but I'm like you, and I know Blair's like this. I think we all believe in not just second chances, but that why wouldn't you think people can get better and learn from their experiences? The line of his I liked. I'd never heard it before. Maybe you guys have, but I asked him something about if he's actually better off for having been fired, and he used that line about never trust a leader without a limp. I thought that was interesting. I mean, to me, it spoke to him embracing the idea that he had stuff to work on.
I believe that so deeply in my heart, too. I've never heard it said in those words, but failure is like the best teacher in a lot of ways. And I think that, and this has come from, I think Mike has said this out loud, I think, but I know people close to him have said that to me, that he just simply was not ready for that job when he got it. Just was not. Took over a World Series winner for a literal Hall of Fame manager. He didn't have any professional coaching experience. Just none. Obviously had a 12, 13, something like that, big league career. Successful too, 4 Gold Gloves, I think. He was a good player, but had just never managed and just wasn't ready for that job at that scale at that moment. And I just, how could you not think that he's going to get a little bit better? And look, I say all this, and I always have to disclaimer it. I don't think big league managers matter that much, or at least not nearly as much as a lot of us make them out to be. But it's pretty easy to see the strengths, and certainly easy to see why Dayton more specifically is drawn to Mike Matheny. I mean, they see the world the same way, and I think that we can't ignore that part of it too.
He was the youngest manager in baseball when he was hired by the Cardinals. He was 41.
Sort of kicked off that trend of hiring guys straight out of their playing careers. I mean, you just saw Carlos Beltran, and there's probably been 15 or 20 of them in the years since.
He's taking over a Royals team that is not dissimilar from the team that Ned Yost took over 10 years ago in terms of just kind of where they are in their growth. But there are some differences, right? This Royals team that Mike Matheny takes over has some pieces that maybe Ned didn't have, more experienced pieces, cornerstone type players that Ned didn't inherit a team that had a guy who had led the American League in home runs, that had Gold Glove ability in his left fielder and catcher. So does Mike Matheny have is this a better situation for him to walk into than what Ned walked into a decade ago?
It's a hell of a comparison because it's not even close. There are better big league pieces on this team than Ned's first team. And I think the industry consensus would be that it's not even close. There were better pieces in the minor league system when Ned took over. It's just a hell of an interesting deal, of how those things are going to mesh.
So, it's interesting. Sorry, just a quick thought.
So what would you rather have?
In a way, I'd say this, because I hope I've set this up the right way. The 3, 4, 5 guys that you think you can count on right now are guys they would only have wished could be that, right? They could have only hoped that you'd have the American League, 3-time American League hit leader?
Twice. In WHIP.
In WHIP. I guess we think to some degree that jury's still out on Dozier, but I think Dozier's got a chance to be a cornerstone. Obviously, if Mondesi can stay healthy, Sal Perez coming back. If you knew that Moustakas, Hosmer, Sal, whatever, were going to be that in the 2 years, you'd take that, right? I mean, you'd have taken that in 10 or 11. So in a way, they've kind of got the baseline that they could only hope for then. But of course, they don't have the same amount of things coming up through this pipeline, or at least maybe not quite ripe.
Yeah, I think this is probably the more of the like cop-out answer because we saw how it ended, right? But I think I would take the time before.
the Yost conditions.
Yeah, just because, but there was more of a depth then. That wasn't just, and I'm trying to think, was Ned hired in 11? May of 11, when he took over the interim tag. I always get those years confused.
I think that's right.
And
that's right.
So it was the year before then, because I think it was in 2010
that he joined the team.
That Baseball America called it the best farm system that they had ever graded. And I think that was a span of 25, 30 years, something like that. So I think in general, I said this to a different audience today, Vahe, right? But, a bird in the hand rather than, 2 in the bush or whatever. Right. I would normally take that, but there was just such a depth of high ceiling. Hosmer and Moustakas were top 10 prospects in baseball at one point, I believe. Will Myers was up there. It's easy to forget now because only one of them really turned out in Danny Duffy, depending on what you think about Mike Montgomery. But they had a million left-handed pitchers that people thought were going to be terrific. Chris Dwyer, John Lamb. There were others in there. So there was just such a depth that I don't think exists at the moment.
Well, it's interesting, too, to think of it this way, and we have no benefit of foresight on this, but a way to look at this is how soon does this batch that they sort of have up give them a chance to be competitive again?
That's right.
And I don't know. We won't know till we know.
And Dozier is 28, something like that.
And Witt's over.
Soler
30, right?
is right there. Yeah, Witt's in his 30s. Sal is. People, we haven't talked about this much, and we will certainly at least when spring training starts, if not sooner. But Sal Perez is going to be a different player when he comes back. He's not going to be 140 games as your catcher. They're going to have to DH him a lot more than they have. They're going to play him at first base more. It's going to be a different chapter, sort of in his career. So, I might feel differently if all those guys, those established big leaguers, were 24, 25. But really, of those high-end guys, Mondesi is the only one at that age. And Mondesi, if you look at the end of his season numbers, did not have the year that we thought he was having, in May. So, look, I don't say this as like being overly pessimistic about the Royals' future, because I actually feel like I'm more optimistic than I think the industry consensus. But they've got a lot of holes to fill. They've got, Khalil Lee has to be a player. They don't need all 5 of those college pitchers that they drafted 2 years ago. They don't need all 5 of them to be good starters, but they can't afford for only one of them, I don't think, to be a good starter. They need this thing to get going, I think, pretty quick.
What happens first, Royals in contention in September or a new airport?
What is it, 24?
23.
I like that you're kicking the can down the road right away.
Yeah. I'm just trying to find my mile marker. But that's if construction goes according to plan, right? So 24.
Who's on the runway, so to speak, first?
You know what? Hell, I might take the Royals on that. I think those pitchers are going to start to transition. I think Springer and Coar are probably both going to be up May, June, July, somewhere in there. And I don't expect. I believe next year to be I want to make sure I get my years right. 2011 of the first rebuild. When Sal came up and debuted in Tampa, and they kind of had all their guys. And hopefully there's not our time 2012 year, right? Hopefully you can skip that step. But I don't know. I somehow, and maybe it's just because we just saw it work, right? Like the last time. But I think I actually would bet on this thing taking. And I think, notably, I think the industry consensus would, if you had to take yay or nay, it would be thumbs down.
Because we have access to the information, Ned took over for Trey Hillman in May of 2010.
10.
It
Okay.
was 10.
10.
But it was that offseason, and I think before the 10
Yes.
season, that it was the best farm system in the history of upright man.
By Baseball America or somebody. Yep, that's right.
And at that point, I remember, and I think this is probably still true. At that point, every year that Baseball America had said that a certain franchise had the best farm system of that year, within 4 years, that team made the postseason. So the Royals barely made it,
They
right?
just
It was
snuck in at the end.
2014.
Right.
Oh, with one exception. I think the Pirates were an exception. But so that, 25, 30 years, they'd gone 29 of 30 or whatever it was.
They used their entire time allotted.
Yeah.
4 years to get there.
They came on like gangbusters once they did, though, boy.
All right, I think we're looking. I was just fooling around with a possible lineup for opening day lineup for next year, right? Salvi catching, O'Hearn at first, Nicky Lopez at second, Dozier at third, Mondesi at short. Let's say Alex Gordon and the Royals come to terms on a 1-year deal. So Gordon left, Bubba Starling in center, and Witt in right with Soler as the DH. I think that's that with the age factor for some of these, that's something of a lineup in transition. There's some age there for sure, but it's a major league lineup.
It's a major league lineup, and what's interesting about your question about transition, right? I mean, part of that's obviously Alex, but
I don't know who the left fielder is if it's not
Right.
Alex at this point.
Right.
You could put Soler there, I guess, if you wanted to.
But it's interesting to think about, to Sam's point about Sal and also just Witt's age. Sort of the expectation, at least one of the reasons we think that they weren't dealt, is that the idea that they will be part of the next resurgence. And I think that's just an interesting thing to chew on in what you just presented. Like, okay, I think those guys can still play. I think Sal will play less. Do we see them both here in 2023 being productive?
If in 2023, I think Sal is probably not the primary catcher by that point, and maybe he's a DH. And
You don't see him having a Yadier Molina type of
I
arc?
don't. I think he's taken a lot of hits. I think that they have different body types. I think that matters. I mean, Sal's just a big guy.
Yeah.
And he's already had 2 knee surgeries, at least the one. And now Tommy John. He doesn't move like he used to, and he never moved great. I don't. And I'll tell you this, I don't know if the Royals, in their heart of hearts, if you were going to map out your World Series winning roster, and this is a game that baseball people often play, what that looks like, I'd be curious, if they would put, I think their best case would be somebody like, Melendez as the catcher at that point. So one of these, because they've got some catching prospects, one of those guys to rise up.
Okay.
But what your real point probably was really about what do we think that team will look like in terms of what it can produce next year.
Well, and look, offensively, I think the Royals were not great, but they did have the American League or Major League home run leader, and led them in hits. American League, stolen bases. They had pieces.
3 of the top 4 triples guys, for what that's worth.
There were
something
pieces.
like that.
162 home runs as a team. I noticed that. So, I think you can win with that lineup. I just don't know. I don't know what the rotation's going to be, and who are we looking at 3rd, 4th, and 5th starters, and the bullpen is really a project.
You know what? I was just looked this up just to kind of underline the point that the Royals had a good lineup. Do you know they were 14th in the American League in runs? I would have guessed they were 10th, 11th at least.
Yeah, I would have thought 8th, 9th.
Well, I'm thinking about a lineup with Perez and not Maldonado or whoever else, Gallagher, whoever else.
A catcher was. I mean, they were just giving away outs for a long time in that spot.
And mostly the bottom three in the order.
And Billy Hamilton as well.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying
Hamilton.
Bubba Starling's going to light the world on fire, with the bat, but and sorry, I know I said this like the Bob Sutton defense after they fired him, but probably hard to be worse, hard to be worse than what Billy Hamilton was. But I do think that, generally speaking, they'll be able to score enough to be in some games. But yeah, that's why these pitchers transitioning from the minor leagues, why that's going to be so important. You bolster that rotation, and then all of a sudden maybe you get enough that Danny Duffy can go in the bullpen, or maybe Jake Junis they decide is better, like whatever. But they got to have pitching, because there were times where they were scoring okay, but just if the Royals have a 5-2 lead in the 7th, you feel like they have a 50-50 chance of winning. They can't have that.
To underline something that you have said, and I think it's really smart, Sam, that when I think of the Chiefs, no matter who's a quarterback, I think, well, Andy Reid will help kind of scheme them up, and there's the Andy Reid factor there. And when I think of Kansas basketball, I think, well, look at Bill Self, they got one of the Hall of Fame coach and everything. But when you think of the Royals and the manager, we got into this talking about Mike Matheny. It's like, he doesn't matter.
Yep.
I mean, it's just make sure the pitching changes are right. Although I guess that was one of the complaints about him in St. Louis was the double switch, and he didn't always get that right. But it just strategy wise, it just seems to make less of a difference.
Yeah, especially in the American League.
For sure.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think Mike Matheny's going to look like a really good manager if Kowar, Lynch, Singer, if all these guys turn into really good players.
Manager of the year.
yeah, and he's going to look like a buffoon. And there were times I'm not going to sit here and stand for Ned Yost as a strategic genius or anything like that, but and every manager takes arrows on their bullpen management. I don't care who they are, what city. No doubt about it. It happens in 30 out of 30. But there were a lot of times last year where it didn't matter what Ned did. Maybe you make the argument that the other guy should have got the chance, but then I'd make the argument that the other guy would have blown it worse. It was a decision between two bad choices a lot of times, and that's on Dayton. That's on Dayton and JJ and all those guys to get them better pitchers, and that's the bigger part of this.
Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, did you guys know it is the opening night of another season of college basketball? We'll be back to talk about it in just a moment.
Big O Tires is rolling out Black Friday deals now to December 8th. Get limited time Black Friday savings on oil changes, brakes, car batteries, and more. You'll also save big on tires. How big? Buy 3 select tires, get 1 free with paid installation, including brands like Nitto and Cooper. Get 4 tires, but pay for only 3. Right now at Big O Tires during Black Friday deals only through December 8th. Interest-free financing available too. For your nearest participating location, go to bigotires.com.
Hey, it's Blair. Hey, we have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns we have to offer. And it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. For your convenience, your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. A lot of subscription services won't tell you that. They'll just sneak it on there. We just told you. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. Some sports have a kind of a pageantry opening, right? Opening day in baseball is celebrated. I remember when the Cincinnati Reds were given sort of the honorary position of having the first game. the NFL now starts with a Thursday night opener, and college football has that Labor Day weekend where they get just nights. College basketball kind of just sneaks up on you, right? With a couple of exhibition games, and then all of a sudden you're in the season, and people are asking, well, was that an exhibition game or was that a regular season game? But this year, and like, look, the Champions Classic has been a great event for now almost 10 years now, I suspect. And this year, it's just spectacular with the top 4 teams in one building tonight at Madison Square Garden, with number 1 Michigan State playing number 2 Kentucky, and number 3 Kansas playing number 4 Duke. And I know this is not going to. We're going to talk about the KU Duke game. This is not going to have much shelf life because the game tips off at 6 p.m. today. But I've always kind of dug this Champions Classic. I mean, with these 4 teams, they're usually all ranked, but to have a top 4, that's a hell of a way to get into a season.
It is a lot of energy, a lot of fun, a little bit of probing, and yet nothing that's really going to dictate the season. But it's a lot of star power, and short of late night at the Fog, I guess this is the kickoff night.
The only thing, I love the Champions Classic, because some years those teams are going to be better than others, but that's a pretty good pool of 4, right? Like, that those teams are going to be good. I wonder, what you just said something, Blair, about the season still kind of sneaking up on you. Sometimes I wonder if that's a little bit there in these NBA arenas, right? It's from New York to Chicago to Indy and somewhere else.
One year it was in Atlanta.
Atlanta, that's right. I wonder if you did it on campus. It would look cooler on TV. And I also wonder if you could add to it, have these games at this time, but then bring in other top programs, Carolina, Indiana's down, but, Michigan, some of these other like bigger programs that just have an all day buffet of basketball. There's a moment, like a day that sneaks up on you in college basketball where they do a 24 hours, or
right.
At least
they go around the country with. Yeah, I don't know if
I wonder if you could do
anymore.
that, something like that. It's just, you know what, college basketball's here. We've started. This is us. Look at our, and show it off in the most spectacular fashion, which to me is on campus arenas. And those 4 schools, that are in the Champions Classic, all of them have terrific home courts.
This is left the barn, I guess. But would it all just come together in a different way if you just decided it's going to be after Thanksgiving? And
I thought about that too. Yep.
The college football is sort of put in its compartment, right? We're at that point just getting ready for the conference championship games and bowls. I don't know. I mean, it's. I like your point though, Sam, about doing something just absolute all-in energy on the whole game. This is about as close as it can get, though, if you get the top 4 playing in one building in one night. I mean, that's pretty neat.
I wonder if you could go, like Black Friday or something is all, college basketball. If you push it back, I think you can condense the schedule a little bit, but I think you still want the championship game to be done before the NBA playoffs. I would think that you'd want that. The NBA playoffs next year start on April 19th, so you'd have an extra, 2 weeks, to play with. So you'd push the season back 3 weeks and have 2 weeks on the back end. You'd have to condense a little bit, but I'd be all in favor of that too.
My thought has always been, when we think about the opening of sports, the dates are always fluid. There's no set date for baseball's opening day. It's just if it falls on this weekend. NFL is always this particular Thursday. But to me, with college basketball, make December 1 the start of the college basketball. On a years that it doesn't fall on a Sunday, make December 1st no matter what day of the week it is. It could be a Friday, it could be a Monday. Make that the college basketball opening, and that's the date on everybody's calendar. When you buy your calendars at the end of the year, and they all have the holidays, on those dates, you can put the college basketball opener as one of those.
I'm in favor. Yeah.
But I do, in that way at least. Not only do you have a uniform start date for everybody, but you get college basketball out of November and let college football have its month. Yep. Its biggest month, the biggest games. Look at this weekend in college football with Alabama, LSU, and Penn State, Minnesota, and Iowa, Wisconsin, even Kansas State, Texas. I mean, just a bunch of great games this weekend after having crap games last weekend. Let college football play itself out in November. College basketball begins December 1st. And listen, I know that's 1940s thinking because that's what used to happen. When you go back to you look at a 1940s basketball media guide and look at the schedule, and everything started in December, right? Yeah. But it's just not the way. So look, KU Duke tonight. Kansas is 3 in both polls, both major polls, and this is setting up to be, a terrific one of those 33-win type seasons over at KU with, getting to the Elite Eight, have the fingers crossed at that point with the KU team, and wondering if they can get to the Final Four. Going to be a little bit, not a little bit. There's a cloud hanging over the program all year until there's some resolution with the NCAA investigation. Is that going to be part of the narrative that follows Kansas all year?
I think so, in some form or another, right? And one of the ways we know it will be the trite but true, I guess is a way to put it, a way that teams and coaches will appropriate that kind of thing in their favor, right? So clearly Kansas will, I don't know how much they'll publicly say it, but maybe Bill will allude to it a little bit, but I mean, they'll absolutely make this about, it's just us, everybody's out to get us, NCAA's out to get us, and it'll work, right? I mean, it'll trigger something, I think, inside. I mean, I guess you can overplay that hand, but it wouldn't work if you didn't have a really great team to begin with, too. And I think this is going to be a really fascinating season for KU, in part because that cloud is there.
Well, they've got two of the two players in Udoka Azubuike and Devon Dotson who are on everybody's preseason watch list, preseason conference, all conference. A couple of good guys to build a team around, and kind of in more Bill Self Kansas fashion, a true post player in Azubuike, and with the return of Silvio De Souza, I guess that's sort of the mystery of this team, right? He wants to be able to play both of those guys, but you got to figure out if they work together on the floor and together. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but it looks like a deep Kansas team, and guys who got a lot of minutes last year might not get as many minutes this year. We already know that Mitch Lightfoot, the plan for him is to redshirt this year, and he was getting a lot of minutes a year ago. So, is this shaping up as a Final Four type year for KU?
I mean, yeah.
Why not?
They've got enough guys, right? It's interesting. If one of the strengths of this team is the post depth, the current reality of college basketball might make it hard for Kansas to use that post depth, because one of the challenges, and I think Bill Self has talked about this out loud publicly, is if you can smother teams with Azubuike and either Silvio or McCormick,
yep.
Just two of those three on the floor at the same time, and you're just going to manhandle people inside. But on the flip, now one of those guys has to guard a guard, because a lot of teams are going to go four outside of one. It's just an interesting, kind of strategic, kind of deal like that. But it's shaping up to be a hell of an interesting season, not just because of the talent, Devon Dotson coming back. I mean, there's just not a lot of teams that have a point guard with some experience, like Dotson and a post guy. I know he's still just 20. I think he's still 20, Azubuike, but, a senior, coming back. And they've got both of that. And this cloud. And it's absolutely a cloud. And, there's 100% chance, by the way, I didn't think about this until just now, but like every broadcast, KU plays a lot of national games, obviously, but that's going to be a thing that KU fans are just sick of hearing about. It's going to be an over-under, first TV timeout, or after are they going to mention that? But it's going to be part of the story.
It is part of the narrative. Every time, I remember last year when Silvio De Souza was sitting on the bench, every time they went to, the camera went to him, he had to talk about why he was sitting out at the moment. Of course, he was, he got his suspension reduced to the one season, which was last year. But yeah, I've talked to Fran Fraschilla about this, and he says, yes, that's, you can't ignore it. You're going to talk about it. So
one key player, I mean, just not to get too far into the weeds, but one key player for them is going to be Isaiah Moss, because they need shooting.
Yep. He's the shooter.
They need shooters to make those post people matter. To bring those, bring the defenders out. That's going to be a huge part. Is he playing? Tonight,
Well, I heard he was playing on a limited basis.
Yeah.
So he's got he's been injured, and it's been throughout the preseason. He's the transfer from Iowa.
From Iowa, right?
So and he would be their best shooter on the floor whenever he's on there. So interesting that the 3-point line's moved back now. International distance. That'll be fun to see and see what impact that has on the college game. But it's also opening night for Kansas State. The Wildcats are home to North Dakota State. And you think, rollover. North Dakota State was in the tournament last year, is favored to win the Summit, and returns all 5 starters. This is a game that, if K-State's not in the preseason top 25, but if they were, this would be a red alert, upset alert type of game. And Kansas State's having to go forward without Dean Wade and Barry Brown, and but they have nice pieces as well with Cartier-Jada and Xavier Sneed. I think Kellis tells me it's the Juwan Jackson, the freshman guard, is someone who's exciting the fans there. So Kansas State picked 9th. Maybe this is one of those situations similar to Missouri, which was picked 13th in the SEC, where we think that this is a better team than next to last in the conference, don't you think?
I think that's true, and I guess the question will come to be whether it's because we think we know a little better than they do from outside, or it turns out we're
blinded by.
Yeah. But you gotta I think we can like the pieces. I do think Barry Brown, for instance, is kind of a funny thing to think about. Like he's not just a loss of numbers, right? I mean, he was kind of the glue guy in a lot of different ways. So that it's hard to know the intangible aspect of not having him back too. I think that's part of that. But meanwhile, I mean, Sneed and Jada are 2 guys that, in particular, that I've always really liked, and now they're here and they've got to be more than they've been, and more consistently than they've been. But I think they're going to be in that top half of the Big 12.
I'll never forget the Kentucky game that you and I covered in Atlanta in the tournament a couple of years ago, where Xavier Sneed just came up huge in that game, 23 points, and was the best player on the floor.
He was.
He's a stud.
He is. Yeah.
He's a stud.
I think there's a stud in there waiting to come out on a consistent basis.
I remember his freshman year, I happened to be working on this thing where I went and watched a lot of K-State practices, and I just remember looking at that guy. He's so raw, but I just remember thinking, God, if he stays around, junior, senior year, he's going to be a monster. And here he is, and I think that guy is in there. I think he can shoot. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's a hell of a defender. Probably underrated defensively. Barry Brown got, deservedly so. Most of the attention is a shutdown guy last year. But I think Xavier Sneed is, he's an all-conference, type of talent. I think look, the same way that Conzo Martin said, if we're the 13th best team in the SEC, this is the best league in college basketball history. If K-State is the second to worst team in the Big 12, I mean, that's a hell of a league.
It's a great conference.
As well.
And the 3 of us spoke at the Tiger Club of Kansas City earlier today, and we talked a little bit about Tiger basketball, which starts on Wednesday. They play Wednesday and Friday this week to open the season. And we spent a lot of time talking about Jeremiah Tillman and Drew Smith as key components. What we didn't talk about, though, was they've got some experience back in Pickett and Xavier Pinson and Watson, the sophomore guards. That's a nice little, and so we bring Tillman back. They've got a nice little foundation here of experience that I think is getting overlooked by those that do the prognosticating.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny. It is, some certain amount of experience, but it's sort of young experience too. So maybe that's less than overwhelming that way for a team that has not been what you'd hope it would have been. But I think the number did we agree on this? It's 7 of the top 9 scorers back, and then this sort of Drew Smith, for lack of a better term, X factor. I mean, I think people think he can be a difference maker in how everything else falls. And if Jeremiah Tillman becomes the guy that he almost has been several times, but not quite, I think that they can do a lot of different things. I think they could beat a lot of different ways. I think they'll be good defensively. Just like K-State a little bit, though, I feel like it's a little bit of like pieces that we don't quite know how they mesh. Whereas with Kansas, I think we have some sense of how it'll mesh, although a lot of these guys haven't been together before. But I think that's kind of the mystery of Missouri, is getting it to gel.
I thought it was interesting, too, in their one exhibition game. They were close with Central Missouri at halftime, ended up running away in the second half. But Kobe Brown started that game, and not the Trey Jackson, the more ballyhooed freshman. So be interesting to see what Missouri rolls out there for a starting lineup on Wednesday. Sam Mellinger, Vahe, Gregorian, thanks so much for stopping by and chatting sports in Kansas City.
Pleasure, Blair.
That's a show.
Links to the stories written about Matheny and the Royals can be found in the show notes on the True Blue app, kansascity.com, and the print editions of the Kansas City Star. Thanks to Leah Becerra for producing today's show, and congratulations, Leah, on the good time in last weekend's half marathon. That's a marathon and a half marathon in 3 weeks for Leah. Time to slow down a bit. Where you can rate and review SportsBeat KC, please do that. We'd love to hear your comments. And we'll be back on Wednesday with another SportsBeat KC, where we talk sports in Kansas City. Thanks for listening.